Okay, so welcome to our fifth lesson in the AP Environmental Science Flipped Classroom. Today we're going to be talking about some of our biogeochemical cycles, and we're starting with the nitrogen cycle. So let's jump right in. All right, so first a quick overview of the nitrogen cycle itself. I'm going to slide myself out of the way here. Okay, so the nitrogen cycle cycles nitrogen through the atmosphere, the earth, and through living things. And it moves just as the carbon cycle does between sources, through sinks, and reservoirs. And there are lots of different steps along the way. Sources, of course, are going to be those that release nitrogen into the atmosphere or into other living things. Sinks are going to take nitrogen out of the atmosphere in increasing amounts. So remember, a sink takes in more than it releases. So nitrogen reservoirs hold nitrogen for relatively short amounts of time. You guys remember in the carbon cycle that there are reservoirs that hold carbon for very prolonged periods of time, like fossil fuels and rock. Nitrogen reservoirs are pretty short-lived. So plants contain nitrogen, all living things contain nitrogen, the soil holds nitrogen, and of course the atmosphere is the primary reservoir for the nitrogen cycle. 70% of our atmosphere is nitrogen gas. Nitrogen gas, even though it is a huge component of our atmosphere, is not usable by plants or animals as N2. It has to be converted into another form in order for it to be usable by living things. It is a critical nutrient for both plants and animals. We need nitrogen to build DNA, to build RNA, to build amino acids, which are the foundation or the building blocks of proteins. And so nitrogen is incredibly important to life. So if nitrogen exists as unusable nitrogen gas, how do we take it in? How do we get it from the places where it exists into us and into other living things? So this is our nitrogen cycle. I know it looks incredibly complex in this image. So we're going to first talk about nitrogen fixation. So we have lots of different processes when it comes to nitrogen. We're going to talk about nitrogen fixation. So nitrogen fixation is the process of that nitrogen gas, that N2 gas, being converted into biologically available forms. And those either take the form of ammonia or ammonium or nitrates. And so that involves usually bacterial fixation. So there are some bacteria that live in the soil. There are some bacteria that live in a symbiotic relationship in root nodules of certain plants. And those bacteria, whether they're living in the soil or whether they are those associated with certain plants, convert nitrogen into ammonia. And that process is called fixation. And that fixation process, again, converts either into ammonia or ammonium. Legumes, so things like peas, beans, and peanuts, live in the root nodules. The bacteria live in the root nodules and they fix nitrogen for them. And the plants are able to uptake ammonia because it's been fixed by the bacteria. In exchange, the bacteria take amino acids from the plant. These are the type of plants that a lot of farmers will use in alternating years in order to fix nitrogen back into the soil through crop rotation, so that not only the crop that's being grown this year, but the crop that's being grown next year will benefit from that nitrogen fixing action in the soil. We also have synthetic fixation, and in synthetic fixation, we go through an artificial process that takes nitrogen and hydrogen gas and converts it into ammonia and then eventually into nitrates. That process is very energy intensive, so it uses a lot of fossil fuels. So you can see here in our nitrogen cycle that we have both human activities that process nitrogen from the air, as well as natural activities. So we add nitrates to fertilizers to help plants grow. Okay. So fixation is one step. It's the process of taking nitrogen and converting it into ammonia, or one step farther with synthetic fixation into nitrates. Assimilation is the process of plants and animals uptaking nitrogen, usually in the form of nitrates, and incorporating it into their body. Take in nitrates and ammonia or ammonium from the soil. Animals assimilate nitrogen by eating plants or by eating other animals. The process of ammonification is when soil bacteria, microbes, and decomposers convert waste and dead biomass back into ammonia or ammonium and return it to the soil. We also have the process of nitrification. This is the conversion of the ammonium ion into nitrate and nitrite ions by soil bacteria. Nitrate and nitrite are the most usable forms of nitrogen by plants. Denitrification occurs in anaerobic environments, and that is the conversion of soil nitrates, so that NO3 ion, into nitrous oxide gas or nitrogen gas, which then returns to the atmosphere. So this tends to happen in waterlogged soils, and it loses the nitrates from the cycle of being able to be uptaken by plants and then eventually animals. All right, so how do we impact this cycle? We talked about in the carbon cycle that we'd impact the cycle by burning anything that was composed of carbon, especially including fossil fuels. We also have a significant impact on the nitrogen cycle. Nitrous oxide is a greenhouse gas which warms Earth's climate. So in the process of over-fertilization, often, and over waterlogging of soil from industrial farming techniques, we tend to increase nitrous oxide emissions. Again, with over-fertilization, we have excess fertilizer, which can lead to ammonia gas entering the atmosphere, which causes respiratory irritation in humans and animals, but again, also makes it not available to the plants. And then we have leaching and eutrophication. So when we over fertilize and those nitrates run off, or they leach out of the soil into our surface waters, then they wind up in waterways, whether those are streams, lakes, rivers, and that process leads to algal blooms that can block the sun and kill other aquatic plants as well as animals. Okay, so we will also be talking about the phosphorus cycle as well as the water cycle. So as always, if you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks.